So it's very nice. You are actually our first guinea pig for this.
That's actually nice, yeah.
So my first question is, what exactly is your profession called? Is it a marine biologist?
I think we can give the name ourselves. That's the nice thing of this job. I mean, on the paper, we are just wissenschaftlicher Mitarbeiter. So it's like a scientific researcher, scientific, I don't know, employee. So it doesn't really say, right? But when I have to write these short bios for like projects or whatever, I think it depending on what the project is about, I choose the words differently. So sometimes I'm a marine ecologist, which is maybe more broad. Sometimes I'm a marine biogeochemist, which is a little bit more specific. But in the end, it's about how you describe yourself. Of course, my studies were marine biology, or marine microbiology actually was my master's. So I did my bachelor's in biology generally, and then my master's in marine microbiology. But then my PhD was about polar phytoplankton. So you could also say I'm a phytoplankton expert. So it really depends to which level you want to describe it. Yeah.
So outreach already starts there, so to say, that you basically have to choose which word to use for your job, depending on whom you talk
Exactly.
to.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. If you talk, for example, to your family, you might just say, I'm a biologist.
Yeah, I understand. Or
Because,
marine biologist, maybe.
yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I guess of all the scientists that I work with, you are one of the people that use social media the most, right? So
Probably, yes.
which channels do you use?
That has changed through the years. Like, I think I've been adapting to whatever comes up. I started using a lot Photolog back in the times where Photolog was a thing. And then, of course, I moved to Facebook like everyone else. And now it's more about Instagram and Twitter. And it's kind of funny because they are used for different things. Like Instagram is more about pictures with, of course, a short message. And I do love pictures, so that's the one I use the most.
Yeah.
And Twitter is more about, or I have the feeling it's more about news or more information. So that's also very useful in recent times to find out about conferences happening or about papers being published. So I think both are useful, but maybe in different ways, and I use both.
Yes, exactly. You use them both. That's what I can also see in my work, that you appear a lot. And then therefore my question would be, how much time does that take you per day or per week?
I think it doesn't take too much time to just, let's say, look into it and retweet or re-forward things. That takes seconds. Of course, if you sum it up through the day, some days it's more, some days it's less, but that's kind of something that you do in the 5 minutes that you have while waiting for your coffee to get warm or whatever. So that's not a big thing. But creating content, meaning, okay, today I want to write something maybe about women in science or whatever, that takes time because then you have to think a lot about what you write, how you write it, with which image. Maybe you need to find the picture. So when I write a little bit more elaborated things, that maybe takes me an hour or something like that to get to that final post.
Yeah, that's also my experience in outreach, that one can't like plan enough time for that basically, because it takes a lot of time to create content. So then of course my follow-up would be like, how do you do it? Because I know that you are actually very active in science, as like this is your main job. So how do you do it? Do you do it in the evenings, on the weekends? How do you manage?
For me, it's more like something in between.
Yeah.
I need that change of focus to keep moving. Like I cannot spend one day just working on one thing. Let's say if I need to work one day, entire day on analyzing some data set, I need some moments of doing something else. And usually I use these moments to do that. But yeah, of course, the evenings is usually the time where you find most time to sit down and relax and think about something else, think about what I've done today and how can I bring that out to the world. It's usually the extra time in the evenings. Yeah.
So then how beneficial would you say is this outreach work and the time you spend? Like how beneficial for your scientific situation is it?
I actually don't know, because you write a post and you send it out there, and you actually don't really know what an impact it has. Of course, in my case, I don't have open public profiles.
Yeah.
So it's mostly my friends and family that are like, oh, how cute, she's doing something. In Twitter is a little bit different, because there, of course, it's open and everyone can read it. So maybe those posts have a little bit more outreach, they reach further out, so to say. How that impacts actually in my career, I have no idea, because no one ever tells you if you're being judged by that at all. Like, I know that in the last years, I invested some time in publishing, for example, a paper for kids instead of a regular paper. And I don't know if this is a positive thing or not. I will see down the line. I'm investing now a lot of time in a podcast, and for me, it has a lot of personal benefits, but I don't know if in terms of my job, if that will actually have benefits. I do want to think, and I do believe that funding agencies and so on are looking more and more for this multidisciplinary profiles, where scientists are not just that person that sits in the lab and does some analysis. They want someone that is also able to communicate what they do, not only through a scientific paper, but also giving talks or through social media, writing blogs or giving interviews or whatever. So I want to think that on the long run, this will be appreciated, but I haven't seen yet any specific appreciation of that by any funding agency or any boss that says, oh, cool that you did that. They're just like, cool, that's it. But they don't really put a value on it.
Although I figure the time for that will come.
That's what I hope for, yeah.
So how do you think, when have you already maybe posted a tweet with a paper you recently published, and would you say that gave you like a broader, I don't know, target group or something?
To be honest, I don't know. Like, I have published papers, or let's say when I've published a paper, I've put it on Twitter or Instagram or whatever. I don't know if that really makes the paper get further out there. Of course, if an institution, let's say GEOMAR or AVI or whatever institution you're working for, picks up on that paper and they make a press release and they tweet about it or Instagram about it or whatever, then I think that has a much further outreach than if I just retweet it from my personal account, because in the end it's about the followers. And as I said before, the followers I have are mostly my friends.
Yeah, and your family. Yeah, and they are not scientists necessarily.
I mean, many of them, yes. But of course, I also have a lot of friends in different fields of science. And for them, it's like, oh, interesting or cool that she published another paper. But they are not the ones that are going to cite that paper, for example. But I do think what it works best, at least for me, what I've seen direct impact from, is when I publish a paper, I also try to send it, like to send the PDF to all my scientific collaborators, contacts, whatever, in that community. So for example, if I publish a paper about the Arctic, I send it to all my collaborators or people I know that work on similar topics, because I know that they are the ones that are going to publish a paper in the next months or years, and they will cite it because they need that piece of information for their puzzle. So I think that is maybe the most direct way of actually getting your papers more cited and more visible.
So basically, it's the multitude of channels that kind of can make the difference. And I mean, by what you say now, I would also think that you do reach a broader public with your paper, even though then, of course, it might not get cited by that public. They will still now get a piece of information they might usually not have access to, right?
Definitely. And what I think also makes a big difference is, for example, when you publish a paper that is very data heavy, or let's say it's a very dry paper, all these, let's say, people outside of academia or in academia but in another field, they look through it, and usually the feedback that they give you is like, cool, but I didn't understand anything. Like, thanks for sharing, but it didn't mean anything to me, right?
Yeah.
But when I publish papers that are more conceptual or they have more figures or schematics in them, then I usually get more detailed feedback, meaning they actually read it and they actually understood something, right? They're like, oh, so I see from this paper that this is happening in the Arctic. Wow, I didn't know that. So I think it's also very important to have that in every paper, that you have the conceptual schematic at the end that people can actually look at and go like, okay, so this is the message of the paper. Now I get it.
Yeah.
Because if not, they're just like, that's a bunch of data that you analyze there. Seems like a lot of work. Congratulations. But it didn't mean anything to me.
So maybe also for all scientists, kind of the call to also, I don't know, publish some sort of a simple language summary or something for exactly that purpose.
Yeah, I actually have this revolutionary idea. It's not revolutionary, but I think it would be really cool if every paper that is published would be accompanied with a few slides, like PowerPoint slides or whatever you want to use for it, explaining the key messages of the paper. Because to be honest, nowadays we're flooded with information. There's papers published every day. I don't know how many per day, but way too many. Even in specific tiny fields like Arctic phytoplankton or upwelling regions, you have like tons of papers every day out. And so it's really difficult to catch up with the literature. And then you're writing your paper and then you forget 20 new papers that just came out and you actually had to cite. And that's just because it's a time-consuming task. Like
Yeah.
we always, as scientists, we very often try to say, oh, I'm going to read at least one paper per day. But I know barely people that actually manage to do that. I mean, some are very disciplined and they manage, but most of the people are like, oh, I'm way behind in my literature, up to date, state of the art. And so I think if papers would be, I know that I sit down and in 10 minutes, I have an overview over this paper. And if the paper is really interesting and is really useful for what I do, then I will read the details and I will go to the materials and methods and the results and whatever. But if not, then at least I know, okay, this paper is saying this. And if I need to cite it for this, I know which one it is. And that's it. But we will see if the community goes in that direction. Some people are very lazy to prepare visually appealing or to the point summaries of their papers.
Yes, yeah, sure. I mean, not everyone is there. Yeah. So what I wonder, you have channels and you also on these channels post personal things. So you don't just post scientific stuff or about your work, you also mix it with your personal life. So as how problematic would you see for a scientist to post personal things or about their personal life and situation? Or would you say, oh no, this is really no problem at all?
So the fact that I still only have, let's say, one account for everything has two issues, like one bad thing and one positive thing. The bad thing is, of course, that because I post both things, I don't want to make it public. And that's why in the end, my outreach doesn't get too far because it's just my friends and my family. And I really curate who is following and who is not. And I delete people when I haven't interacted with them in years. I'm like, okay, delete. And so that, of course, it's a bad thing in terms of the outreach that I do. But of course, it protects my private life from being public. But the positive thing is that people see that you're actually a real person and that you have a life. You're not just a scientist. Like science is not the only thing you do. You also enjoy going out with your kid playing or whatever, any other things that you do. So, or you cook something new. And I actually started appreciating that recently when I saw that for example, my previous boss in Spain, he's a really top guy in synthetic biology. And he's usually not a very close person. And he opened a Twitter account and he started tweeting everything. Like he tweets 20 times per day. And then you start having a glimpse into how the life of a scientist is. Like the scientist at this top level, I would say, in this example. And it's surprising how, for him, things like cooking is suddenly part of science also. And so he starts mixing things with each other, or family issues interact with the science issues, or the other way around. And I find that much more likable than people that just post, oh, I published this paper, or I went to this conference, or this is also interesting, but you alienate people if you don't have a little bit of both. I'm not saying that everyone has to share their whole life on Twitter and Instagram, for God's sake, no. But just to have this touch that you still feel, okay, this person is actually human, and he or she is also doing other things, that it's not just science. So because I appreciate that in other accounts, I keep on doing it, having both. But it is difficult. And actually, I think what I've recently tried to do is I keep most of the personal stuff in Instagram, and Twitter is merely scientific. But if that works, I don't know. We will see. I can struggle with that a bit, how to separate them or not, or yeah, it's tough.
So then I have a follow-up, because I wonder, especially now when you are mixing it, but also when you're not mixing it. Let's assume that one might also have separate accounts for these things. Do you fear, or are you afraid that anything you post might in the end affect your scientific credibility?
I'm maybe too impulsive and passionate to think about that. But now that you ask, yes, of course. I mean, it can have a negative impact, sure, because people, I mean, if you don't think 20 times before you post something, you might post something that is not correct, or that is, I don't know, even if you retweet something, it might turn out that the post that you are retweeting is actually from a company that is destroying the environment, for example. I don't know, but you didn't know. Everything we post online stays there forever, and we will be judged on that. So I think that's an issue, but at the same time, I think the internet nowadays moves so fast, and there's so much out there, that people will judge you in the end for, let's say, the majority of your content, and they will not go to pinpoint like the time where you did that mistake. I want to hope that. Of course, if you have enemies, sure, they will go for those errors, and they will try to destroy you with that.
I asked this because I have the impression that many scientists are really afraid that they may just be, I don't know, misinterpreted or misquoted when they go out there and do outreach. So is this something that you feel might actually really happen? Is this something that is happening a lot?
It can happen very quickly, but actually, I think it happens more often when you give actual interviews. Like, for example, I don't know, you go to the Arctic, you do an expedition, and you have a new discovery, but of course it's very preliminary, and the press is waiting on the harbor to talk to you, and you as a scientist are not trained to do this, and so you blab something out as you come to land of what you've done in the expedition, and then that gets misquoted. I think that happens more easily, or scientists that read your paper, let's say journalists that read your paper, understand nothing about it, and they don't contact you, but they just interpret the message they want out of the paper, and they publish that. I think that happens way more often than being misquoted on social media for something that you wrote. Like, I think the fear of that shouldn't be in social media. I think it's more when you directly talk to journalists, or when you publish a paper and it's basically out there and out of your control, and they take it and cite it for something that it was not meant to.
So you would say rather press training than staying away from social media then. So what would you say are the channels that scientists in general use? Which media channels do they use?
You mean social media or normal?
Well, let's say all of them. If you had to summarize, where do I meet my scientists, kind of? Where can I read about them?
I've realized that Twitter seems to be the place. Twitter seems to be the place where most scientists, even high impact scientists, older scientists, they feel comfortable there, and they do publish more and share more about conferences happening, workshops, papers they publish. I think that happens more on Twitter than on other channels right now. And then in terms of, yeah, I really don't know in terms of newspapers, let's say, or magazines. I think Geo and National Geographic are still very, very big platforms for broadcasting your science to a broader population. But of course, not everyone has access to having someone from the National Geographic team on their expedition to broadcast what they're doing. That usually comes together with, if you work in some area that is extreme or beautiful or whatever, then they usually come, but otherwise they don't. But yeah, I think in the end, to be honest, it's about having personal connections. Like if you know someone that works for some TV or for some magazine, then they know about your work, and then it's like, okay, let's organize something. It happened to me recently, for example, that a former colleague from my master's here in Bremen, he didn't stay in science, he went into scientific journalism. And then because he knows me, he contacted me and was like, okay, your work sounds super interesting, should we organize an interview? And so this happens more on a personal level rather than some random person finding me and going like, I'm interested in your science, can we talk?
Yeah, okay. So how exactly do media work for scientists? Like, you say it's a lot of random then, that somebody stumbles upon your stuff and then they come and do an interview. So how do media work for scientists, and how do scientists like the possibilities? Would you say they use them, or are they rather shy about them?
I think that depends a lot on the character. I think in general, for example, in Germany, I have the feeling there's less scientists using social media, maybe because of this fear of being pinpointed for something that they said that was not completely true or whatever. But in other countries, I think, I don't know, I'm making out the comparison with Spain or with South American countries. There, people are much more open to using these channels to share their science and what they're doing. So I think it depends. I think for each person it works differently, and people just have to give it a try and see what works for them.
And you would say that in other countries it may just be more common as a scientist to do outreach themselves, because it seems to me that in Germany this is really something that is rather expected of maybe an official outreach department than from the scientists.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think this is also a matter of, as we said at the beginning, what is requested then from the funding agencies. When you get a project funded, if outreach is a must, then scientists are obliged to do it, and they have to do it in whatever way they want, but they have to do it. While if it's not even mentioned or is not even relevant, then no one will do it, because of course it takes time, right? So I think many scientists, at least what I've experienced in Germany, they focus a lot on what they're doing and publishing their papers and reaching out only inside their little circle in the scientific community, but they don't really care if the world knows about what they do or not. And I think that's also, maybe it's a big difference between if what you do is basic research versus if what you do is applied research. If you do basic research, yes, maybe one day your results will be used for something, right? But maybe not. Maybe it's just part of the global knowledge and that's it. And so many scientists, I think they also think that the public is just not interested in knowing, I don't know, which new bacteria they found in some deep sea hydrothermal vent, for example. But I think scientists that work on more applied things, they're eager to actually tell the people, okay, this is what we discovered. This is what might be useful for us as society. This is what something that you can see that has an impact in your life. Like, for example, all the corona researchers, they're all telling about what they're doing, and they're all saying, look how cool we are saving your asses here from the virus. So I think it also depends on what you're doing. And climate change and marine research, and polar research, they are very interesting topics for the general public because people know very little about it. But it's on our hands to make it accessible to them or not. People will not go and ask, hey, what new bacteria did you discover in the ocean, or what is actually happening with phytoplankton? They probably don't even know what phytoplankton is. So it's on our hands to tell them about it.
Yes, I agree. But would you say that your limited spare time as a scientist is then a huge challenge for your outreach work?
It is, and it's a matter of priorities. But I mean, it's the same with many other things in science, right? For example, at my level, so I'm a senior postdoc now. Sometimes we are not obliged to give lectures or to supervise students. It's something optional. So of course you could not supervise any student, not give any lectures, and spend the whole time writing your papers, and maybe then you have more papers published than someone that has supervised 3 students, 3 masters, 2 bachelors, whatever, you name it. There's so many things, so many extra things that you can do, right? And I think that's it's a personal choice. For me, it was always clear that I like that part of science. I want to do it, even if it comes at the expense of then maybe having 1 paper less out. I know that some people think that this is not good for your career, because in the end you will be judged for the papers you've published and your H index and all those measures. But I'm a firm believer that this is changing, and that we're not looking anymore for scientists that are just able to publish papers, but also that they're good at supervising, at motivating, at leading, at communicating. And I think all these things are now becoming to be more and more important in the CV and in the portfolio of skills of a scientist. And I think that also young scientists are starting to realize that. That it's not anymore like in the old days where you just sit in your ivory tower in your corner, you work on your data, you publish it, and that's the end of your work. I think everything counts, and I really hope that this is counting more and more when you're selected for your next job.
Yes, that's well, we all hope that that's gonna be more important in the future. And now you don't just do social media, which is probably what already many young scientists might already do. You also host your own podcast. It's called Sargassum.
Yeah.
And it is a podcast actually about the Sargassum alga and about all the people that study or use the alga. So how did you get the idea for the podcast, and how do things work out so far?
Okay, so first of all, this was not my idea. I never
Okay.
imagined I would do a podcast, but so this was again related to not having the time to read papers about a new topic. So the thing is, I got really excited about the idea of using sargassum as a carbon sequestration measure in the ocean to mitigate climate change. This idea came from Viktor Smetacek, who is one of my most dearest mentors. And I got really excited about it. And then I was like, okay, I need to learn everything that is out there about sargassum. And then again, of course, yes, I could go through the literature and start reading all the papers that have been ever published about sargassum. But when I started doing this a few years ago, there was not that much published because this has become an issue, a big issue recently, with all the strandings of sargassum on the beaches of the Caribbean and West Africa. And so what I discovered while I was trying to find all this literature and trying to have a good idea of what the sargassum community is doing right now, I found out information hub about sargassum that had an emailing list called SarkNet. And then I registered on that because I said, okay, this could be a good place to meet people working with sargassum. And then there was a girl, Franziska Elmer, who she's doing a climate change sabbatical, meaning she's using 1 year of her life to volunteer for any work related to climate change mitigation, which I find pretty cool. And she was the one that came up with the idea of doing a podcast. And so she wrote it in the Darknet emailing list. She wrote, hey, I have this idea, who wants to join? And then as usual with these things, at the beginning, we were like 10 people or something interested in moving this project forward. And with time, it turned out it was just Francisca and me putting effort in making this move forward. I thought it was a really cool idea. And I thought this was a good chance for me to get to know a lot of people working in this community, because otherwise I wouldn't have the chance to meet them, especially not in times of COVID, where you cannot go to a conference and just meet everyone, right? So this was my motivation behind starting the podcast, because this is a lot of work. This has nothing to do with social media. This is really, you need to prepare the interviews, you need to record them, you need to edit them, you need to prepare the web page, you need to do the outreach. This is a lot of work. So this is really extra time in my 3 hours that is going into that. And so we started doing that. And then it was really funny because it was just the two of us. And I said, Fran, we need a guy. We're two women. We need to have a little bit more like the male input as well, right? And then she was like, yeah, I know a guy that would be perfect for this. And that's when she brought in Robbie into the story. He's the founder of Marine Conservation Without Borders, which is a very cool initiative about bringing information actually and outreach to the local communities. So he takes care that textbooks about the marine research are translated into languages like Quechua or Maya or whatever, so that all these communities have access to their local information about their ecosystems, which I found pretty cool. And so the three of us, we started doing these interviews. And I mean, we're amateurs yet, we're learning by doing. And this is a really fun experience, because through that, I've got to know so many people. And again, the personal level works so much better than just like reading a paper. Now I not just read the paper about someone, but I interviewed the author of that paper. And so that gives you a completely different perspective and type of connection, also for future collaborations and so on. So for me, this was definitely the best way to get immersed into this new topic that I'm super interested in.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. Actually, I listened to a few of your podcasts, so that was actually really nice.
You wanna say openly now what you think about them, or you want to tell me later?
No. It's actually very nice. I can openly say that I really enjoyed it and that I find it very interesting, especially because I wouldn't have thought that one could like make a whole podcast around the one alga, but apparently turns out you can.
Yeah, it's a super interesting topic. That's
Yeah.
why I got excited about it. And the funny thing is that it's not only about the science of sargassum. I mean, science is of course one side of it, but it's about how it impacts local communities, how entrepreneurs are trying to make a business out of it, how new like tech companies are trying to develop new products with it. And so it gives you again this multidisciplinary approach, and it's not just the scientific side of things, which I really enjoy.
Yes. So I mean, you did already say that you think more scientists should do their own outreach, right? I guess in a way that became clear. So my question to you would then be, what would you give as a tip to maybe somebody who's a beginner, like which channel to use or where to start or whatever? Like which tip would you have for somebody who says, I want to do outreach as a scientist now?
So I would do two things. The first one would be, yes, to create your accounts. I would go for Twitter and Instagram, but of course this is up to your personal taste. And I would start by tweeting small things. I think people are also interested in small things. Like don't wait until you have a big paper published to tweet something or to post a picture. It's just people are more interested, I think, also in the how does the daily life of a scientist look like. Like we know a lot about other jobs, but we know very little about what scientists actually do. And even if the job of a scientist, at least in our case, it's sometimes 80% sitting in front of a computer doing some analysis, then people are also interested in knowing, okay, so this is actually how it looks like I think it's important that our job is represented in social media so that the young people see, okay, do I want to be a scientist? Yes or no? And they can make an informed choice, seeing the variety of scientific profiles that are out there. So men, women, any, people that go all the time to the field, people that are all the time in front of the computer, and they see, okay, this is what being a scientist means. Because to be honest, the new generations, they're all stuck to their phones 24/7. And 90% of the content they see is some superstars, some football players, some things in that direction. And they need to know that this is not the cool stuff. The cool stuff is the astronauts flying to the ISS, the scientists going deep into the ocean, finding new things. This is the cool stuff, and we need to show that cool stuff. So I would start with that first, with Twitter, Instagram, showing what is the cool side of your job so that you get other people inspired. And the second thing that I would do, I would go to schools to give talks. I think that for me has been one of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had. I do it way too little because, of course, that also requires time and contacts and so on. But it's actually a very cool experience to go to schools and to tell this class of 20, 25 kids about what you do. And then the questions they ask you, they will blow your mind. Like, I remember once giving a talk with Nico about artificial upwelling, right? And we were telling them, so we bring nutrients to the surface to create more biomass, and the nutrients are in the deep and the light is at the top, and we just want to bring them together. And then one of the kids raised his hand and he was like, but wait, why don't you bring the light down to the deep sea? And I was like, I never even thought about that, that didn't even cross my mind. And then these are the type of things. So sometimes you even get like feedback on what you do, and they ask you these very basic questions like, why are you doing that? Or what are you doing with the plastic bags of the mesocosms when you're done with the experiment? Do you dump them in the ocean? And you're like, no, for God's sake. And so it's interesting to see your science with the eyes of someone that is so blank yet. They're not imprinted with any, social, I mean, it depends, of course, on the age, but they're very bold and they're very direct and they think in very simplistic ways, right? And this brings a new perspective into your science. So if someone wants to get started with outreach, I would definitely recommend them to organize a couple of talks with schools. Maybe start with your own school. Like, go back to your home school where you went to school and talk to some of the teachers and say, hey, would you be interested in me giving a talk about what I do? And they usually appreciate that a lot. And I think that's a really neat place to start.